Yat e kia ani nishle do bilagana bashishchin deschini de shache do bilagana de chanela she amber kenas bakradi yinisha tohatsoi de natsha. We're here at the Hojon Sheep Camp on the top of the Chushkai Mountain. Our Chushkai Mountain is our protector. This mountain is a male mountain that provides the herbs, provides a place for our sheep to come and graze, a resting stop for all of us to refresh and rejuvenate ourselves during the warm summer months. Changing Woman, this was her pathway that led her to the journey throughout her life. And so it plays a significant role not only for my family, but all of our relatives here on Navajo Nation. As our families moved and traveled through with the seasons, our weavers would come up and hoist their gear and their sheep with them, so their flock would be here during the summer. We would set up looms using our trees here, our pine trees, and this provided sheep the relief that they needed from the warmer weather down in the flats. It gave them some of the fresh, natural spring water, and so we would be able to pick certain plants that we would only find up here on the mountains to help us with certain dyes and certain characteristics of what then started embodying this Two Gray Hills design that you see here along the Chushkai Mountains. We are here to promote Diné Be Iiná, a Navajo Lifeway program. This grassroots nonprofit organization mission is to support Navajo sustainable lifeways, which includes our livelihood, our culture, and connection to the land. Join us in supporting and continuing the mission of Diné Be Iiná. Thank you very much for your time, and ahiahat.
My name is Zefren Anderson. My clans are Mud. I'm born from my father's house, which is many houses. My mother's dad's clan is the Red House people, and my father's clan, or my father's father's clans, is the Salt people. So hashklashin lashle hoan planet basis chin kisla chitni dashache ashi dashanale. I am a experimental weaver because I work with archaeology techniques, but I also try to maintain current weaving knowledge, but also historical weaving. So a lot of times I can bring back old weavings from a picture or people how to describe it because of what I've amassed in all of my travels. And I live in Shiprock. I take care of my dad, and that's who I am.
Yaat e she Nikyle Begay and she Twitch eatni nishle Twatoni Bashashin De Sheetni Dashache do Pipatoni Dashanale. Hello, my name is Nikyle Begay. I am of the Bitterwater clan, born for Big Water, and I am a weaver and I am a shepherd. And as you can see, these are the animals that I raise for fleece to use in my weavings.
Yad she Tyrrell Tapaha in the she Kazafan in the shle Bidatni Bashchi Tabaha Dashe Adon Nakaida Dashnale Kut ego Telke in the shle Kudo Tisnas Bas Den Nasha Ado Shima Doshje Dagalkaide Kehote Ako Kintlane de Einistra, and yeah, it's kind of informally said, but I'm Tyrrell Tapaha. I'm a contemporary fiber artist, currently based out in Flagstaff, Arizona. My family is from Tisnaspas, Arizona, in the Four Corners area. My parents are currently residing in Kirtland, New Mexico. But yeah.
Yat Asha Paul Riege Tachini Nishle do Beshpachai Bashashin Aro Kiani Dashiche do Beshpachai Dashanale Okot Ego Dine Nishle Not Najoja Den Ice in the shot do Kajt do Nashnish do Nashne Ehehe. My name is Paul Riege. I'm from Gallup, New Mexico. Born and raised here. Live here now. Love this place, welcome this place, love all the homies that come through, and invite people to experience the beauty that is Diné, and this being one of those places, a complex place, but a place to learn about so many stories and so many lives and so many histories that make up us.
Yeah, so tell me about where and who and how you learned to weave and where that amazing passion inside of each of you came from.
Sweet. So I learned through my great-grandmother as well as my grandfather. I'm a 6th generation weaver. And I could say that it was definitely sparked really, really young. It was really interesting growing up on a border town because you live the duality of, being of the modern day and having all of those commodities along with, raising and living in that pastoral lifestyle. And that was really beautiful. And not only did it accentuate my love for my medium, but as well as just the natural world, because all of those kind of go hand in hand. And it was a really beautiful experience to be living.
So for myself, it all started when I was born. You see, it's common practice in Navajo families where when you have a newborn child, their connection to their mother in the womb is the umbilical cord. So when I was born and my umbilical cord dried and it fell off, my paternal grandmother took it and she placed it in the heart of her sheep corral. So ever since then, to my earliest memory, is me being so excited to go to my grandma's house. I was always saying, Dad, please, let's go. I need to help with the sheep. I need to see what she's up to. My passion had always been there as far as I can remember. So when I got serious about it, I asked her again, I said, Grandma, why is it I want sheep? Why do I want to weave like you? She says, well, when you were a baby and your umbilical cord came off of you, she's like, I placed it there so one of my grandchildren would want to live this lifestyle.
As far back as I can remember, I've always been with my father's grandparents, or my father's parents and their grandparents growing up in Rattlesnake. And spending summers and winters with my mother's parents at their winter cabin in the Chuskas or at Two Gray Hills. And in that, my father's parents, they talked of a lot of traditions and stories of when everyone was weavers. Everyone wove before they discovered oil on the land, and that's how all the women had kept the families together and kept the family very close knit. And they were convinced that going to school, having oil, and this additional income required something different than what they were able to teach them. So they were given that kind of hybrid lifestyle. And that growing up with my grandparents, that's exactly what I came into believing in terms of my philosophy. And I took those stories because I had a masana that still wove, and though we didn't speak the same language, she helped me out with my small projects. A lot of times they were just small weavings here and there, and she really helped me work out how to get the different colors and interlocks together. And that all changed when my father got sick and he needed a full-time caregiver. So I put college on the side burner and I came home, and all that seeming chaos and stress and everything, I found weaving again.
It is joyful. It's something that just seeps within the threads of my veins, as all of us here can share that mutual experience. My great-grandmother from Burntwater, Arizona, she lived to be 106, 104, 105, 106. She passed in 2006, and she was a weaver. And this is one of her weavings right here that I hold dear and close to me. And so I had a relationship with her, and she was very infatuated with hands. That's how she recognized people. That's how she learned about who you were. If you were someone that worked on the field, if you were someone that was, she said my dad was smart because he had soft hands, which meant he was a typer. She's been this matriarch figure for my family and I, and for my mother's sisters and my cousins, and as this totem of knowledge and totem of giving, gift giving and gift receiving. And so when I was born, I think my hands inherently developed and molded from her voice and the voice of our ancestors together, and then the voice of our holy people. I just felt it. Grabbing materials and seeing material relationship between each other, from paper, fiber, yarn, dirt. I think as artists, we're all students to material, and we're all students to what the material wants to say or wants to do. And once you submit control to the material is when I feel like the voices of what's being made shine, and they sing, and you get to dance with them. And you get to wear them. And I made an active decision that everything I make has to be activated by my body in some way. So whether being carried or worn or thrown or tangled between my fingers or my toes, it's been this thing of, as weavers, these are our warps and these are our wefts, and so I want my body to be woven with the work, and I want the work to be woven with my body. And so tie me up, wrap me up, put me in a cocoon, bury me in the ground. I'll be born again with the yucca fibers that you can then weave with in the next life.
When you wake up in the morning, is it already in your head? Do you have to sit and sketch it? How does that design, does it happen through the meditation of the weaving? How does it come to you? And does it come to you all at one time? Does it come in like little bits as your days change, or is it already like completely in your head as a download from the universe and your hands just carry that out?
In my journey so far in life, I've realized that my inspiration derives from a lot of different outlets, whether it just be the cosmic being, whatever that may be, God, Shedian, or whatever you want to label it as. Sometimes my inspiration, there's a common saying that the greatest ideas come to you, you don't come to them. And as of recently in my work, that's definitely what I've been writing on, and it's been a beautiful wave. Aside from that though, I definitely draw a lot of my motifs and just overall energy, and I encompass that from my outward environment. Our loom symbolizes the natural world as it is, and I already definitely gravitate towards that realm, and to embody that not only through my dyes and from the sheep that I shear and process into this way, that energy is always present, and no matter what I'm doing, that's the fuel, the fire that keeps me burning. And I don't know, it's been just a really interesting wave of being able to sit still and listen and be the student to the teacher that is everything. I don't know. Kind of.
Be still.
Be still.
And the earth will speak to you.
Yeah, that's.
Or the sky.
Sky.
Yeah, I find sometimes I like to lay on the ground and sleep on the ground, and then my best ideas come after that time. It's that quiet time when we're one with the mother.
It's our mother and our father.
Yeah.
So they know more than we do.
They're our creative directors.
Creative doctors, to say the least. We have a very forgiving medium. Most mediums typically go fast in terms of sketching or painting. It's very active and you're present. Weaving is in the same way, but our progression is very, very slow and progressive. And with that, I notice, at least in my experience, I get a lot of leeway in my time to be able to be like, oh, currently I'm here. Where do I want to be? Where should it be? And kind of just being open to that response. I'm pretty sure a lot of weavers can at least relate to that. I don't know, but at least in my case, that's what I feel.
Well, I like to consider myself a perfectionist. I have really high OCD with a lot of things, and when I'm learning from my grandmother, she tells me, let it flow, let it speak to you. She's like, if you try to draw it down and you trace it, you're going to spend so much time focusing on what you traced here to try to translate it on the loom that you're going to drive yourself mad trying to make it as perfect as you can. So she says, just let it flow from you. So I'm inspired when I wake up and I see the sheep in the morning. I raise a flock of natural colored sheep. So when I see these colors, I'm like, oh my gosh, this will make a great color sequence in a weaving. And I'm able to bring that to fruition because when I harvest their wool, I'll use those colors in my weaving. So if I look at the rocks that I live by, they're red and they're white. I try to translate that in some of my textile art as well. And And primarily, I weave saddle blankets for horses. So when I get a commission, I ask, could I see your horse, please? Can I draw energy from them? So when I see them, I'm like, okay, I know what to create for this beautiful, majestic animal. So when I bring it to life and I see it on the horse's back, I'm like, okay, that's what I was going for, and I feel accomplished.
I feel like once I've aligned myself with my own journey as a human and as a body, ideas and goodness and kindness and hojot just came flooding and presenting itself to me, which is overwhelming. I'm super sensitive. I'm a big old crybaby, and so I feel everything like. If I'm either not like at a 6-7 on the emotional scale, I'm either like 1 or 99. So right now I think I'm almost maybe I'm like 97 right now. But yeah, I've welcomed materials, and I've welcomed stories and songs and pain, and through weaving and through what you were also saying about our medium being very forgiving. I've always welcomed mistakes. I've always welcomed knots, tangles, scars, because I feel like as my body scars and as my body goes throughout life, and I cut my hand or I fall and break a bone, the work is my child, so the work goes through the same thing. So you'll see at the bottom of this piece I performed with, there's a bunch of rips on it, and this right here was kind of or endurance performance piece about not giving into my idea of perfection that I need, but instead allowing the motion of weaving and the back and forth meditative process like present itself and show itself in the work. So having mistakes and the journey of this piece and of all my work in general is about the action and the movement and the dance between work and my body.
When you're going and trying to find things, do you feel it speaks to you? Or does it take a while for you to like edit through everything and then decide on what the final, like is it an instantaneous thing of like, it says take me home, or is it something where you actually have to kind of do an edit, an orchestration of ideas?
Yeah, totally. I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think it happens, sometimes it's that immediate response, the bodily response of this magnetic attraction between our polar centers. And other times it's something that maybe I was gifted and our conversation isn't going to happen immediately. It'll happen in a few years when we rediscover ourselves. And I find that fun, because then you get to learn about the work in new ways and hear its story in new ways. And one thing that's also really important to me is unmaking things. To make and then unmake and then remake and then destroy, because destroying is a form of making. And so I've been able to have these conversations with my work for such a long time, because they've been through so many different lives and so many different cycles of living, and it's why I think of rebirth so much in my life and in my cosmologies.
How do you get your materials? Where does it come from? What's your favorite things? Just what do you love like getting your hands into and being creative?
Just being that primarily I work from sheep to loom. So I mentioned that my family is agro-pastoral based, and Roy Cady is my grandfather. I'm very fortunate to have the flock that we do and to have the fiber that we do, and to have that Lifeway. And so for my age, very fortunate to have all these outlets come together. But I spin, hand process, hand wash, and do everything as I mentioned. And one of my favorite things is just like vegetable dyes. As you can tell, I'm a colorful person, whether it be personality or through my medium. And with that, I just like to explore the like natural complexities that are present and kind of ever around us. I definitely love my springtime and summer primarily because it's the best time to dye, whether it's just, I don't know, it's just out there. Natural colors, you know, and that just excites me. And like for example, my really big thing as of recently is like experimenting with different fermented dyes. So I've always been aware of prickly pears and my love for them and the just vibrancy that they have. But something that I love about fermented dyes is typically with other types of dyes, there's people really strive for kind of unison color, but with fermented type things, the variegation is always present. And to say the least, I'm enamored by that. And just to get those textures and communication, not only for myself, my medium, but those colors complementing each other. Like this design in particular, people are always like, wow, tell me about how you compose that. I'm like, well, I just really lined up all my colors and figured that it worked well. And that's more or less how it goes.
Actually, by saying that though, you're doing kind of seasonal harmonies.
Seasonal
You know, I'm a
harmonies.
fashion designer, and every season, like spring season was a certain color palette, and fall season, but like our body craves things that time of the year, like it craves those foods, and that's what's available. So like the fact that those are the harmonies of spring or the harmonies of fall is such a beautiful thing, and that all goes back when we say Mother Earth, Father Sky is our creative directors, right? It all comes from listening.
So let me start off by saying that I teach around the U.S. weaving classes. I believe, and I strongly believe this, is weaving and fiber arts and raising an animal for fiber, whether it's sheep or cashmere goats or even alpacas, it's very universal to many cultures around the world. You know, so when I was raised with, or I was asked this question before, like, well, why are you teaching them the Navajo, type weaving? And I'm like, well, there are other cultures in the world that do the exact type weaving that we do. It's just we do it in a way where it really signifies who we are as the people and a culture. So all I'm doing is just opening the door for them. So when I market wool or when I market yarn, I'm saying, like, feel it as I would feel it if I was weaving with it. Let it speak to you as an artist. If you feel, the Navajo word for it is chiji, which means rough, and chiji. Chiji. So it's like a so if you feel it, it feels that way. And if that's right there is a good example with that word making you like very happy and you feel the joy in it. That's how I want other artists and other weavers to feel when they use the fiber. So I personally am very open to selling outside of our people.
Our family raised Rambouillets when I was young, and we were part of the wool buy program. So we would pack and ship almost 3,000 pounds of wool every year. We would have 36 shearing stations going for 5 days straight with all my cousins and all of us. And when we were young, the kids' job was to go through the best bits and take out the bad bits and throw us into the wool stomping pit. So like there are many times I was in the bottom of that bag waiting for more wool so I can get to the top of it. And that was the system. We would do all of that and get back about, for 3,000 pounds of wool, we would make $700. And that was a lot of money to my grandparents, because that would stretch for the flock for the entire year. When economics changed and the government felt that they could no longer subsidize the wool buy program and the Army switched to microfibers, there was suddenly no use for Navajo wool and the wool program shut down. And our 700 flock that went for our family, that was about 4,000 with the combined sisters flocks, came down to we just kept 12. And we did everything, but those last 8 years that we had sheep, we never did anything with the wool. It just stayed in, there's a small pile of it still left, but it was all in bags, as tall as the barn was. What happens across the world affects grandmothers here, and how interconnected we are simply because of globalism. and that, you know, our buy-in choices locally and afar affect what happens to us in our livelihoods. And as I got more into Navajo weaving, the more and more that commercial yarn did not suit my needs. And it came to a head when I had a museum approach me and said, "You're the one that seems to know more about older styles of weaving and fiber processing than anyone else we've interviewed. Can you weave us a sample with what you would say would be a 1750s type woman's dress, what it would be woven of?" And I had a few samples of all the different colors that I collected from Roy, Nikyle, and other sheep producers. And I just spun it straight from the raw fiber. I didn't wash it, I didn't do anything, and I made the yarn, wove the little samples, and sent it. And they came back saying, "Okay, finish this, and then this is the price, we'll do it." And then back then, that was a really big price, and I spent 2 years working on that project, searching for wool that had the same characteristics of those samples I had. So it was 2 years of going to people's flock, getting to know them, helping them out with their flock, and asking, can I shear sheep and keep the fiber? Because the hardest color for me to find at that time period was black. And black that you could leave out in the sun, it wouldn't turn brown. And black that wasn't so thick, it felt like really dry human hair. And with that, spun all these fibers without the aid of any modern tools, no steel, no soaps, just did it with just the spindle tools that we had historically. And then figuring out that they had color, they had red and blue, and how do I take the materials available at the time to create these colors? And half of it was, you need to find the specific process that makes those shades, but you can't get those shades without the base color that comes naturally from the sheep. So I had to find a certain type of tan that had red hairs in it to make a blue with the indigo, which I made. I collected urine in our neighborhood for a year so I could ferment indigo. And if you come to my house, I said, if you have to pee in the bucket. It's just good hospitality. It helps me with my weaving, and I'm not afraid to do that. A lot of people say that's icky. I said, if this creates the color when nothing else will back then this is the process. It was a stinky job. And and coming down to I had to find apples, because there were apples at the point, and had to learn how to make vinegar so I could make the pH the right sort for the reds. And in that, I came to appreciate churro so much that I've switched, for the most part, for all my art show weavings to strictly Navajo churro, natural colors.
Nikyle, just tell me, you were talking about how, even in the past, we've taken apart rugs and rework them. That's actually upcycling in these days, but tell us about the way that fiber is used that way in the past.
So there was something that Eric said that really hit me to my core, which was destruction as a form of making. And it reminded me that when the sheep economy was changed for the Navajo, we went from having millions of churro to these new sheep that required more work. And although they had a finer fleece, it was just harder to work because there's no water here. So a lot of what we resorted to, especially the families when they returned after the long walk, they were basically choked out of having a living when they came home. So they got a hold of Bayetta rugs, and they also got a hold of Germantown rugs, and they would unravel them to use the yarn. And this is where colors like red and green, and this is where the term Germantown style came into play as well. In my family, my grandmother, when there's a young female who has her first menstruation and we're having her Kinal Dust ceremony, her coming of age ceremony, she sets up a special loom where it's woven not with wool, but she shreds pieces of material from her old clothing, and that's how they learn to weave on it. So I never got the full story of that, but I know that not only my grandma does that, but there are also other elders in my area who also do the same. They have old jeans that they'll upscale into, like a throw rug for the ground because they see their wool too valuable to put there. It was kind of a disrespect to throw your wool if it wasn't a sheepskin on the floor. They would weave shreds of jeans or other old items of clothing into these mats and just have them spread out throughout the house. So that was a form of upscaling, and it's still alive and well today.
Like, how did your style evolve? Like, how did you get to this point? Is this what you've always been doing and you got really good at it? Or is this like a kind of slow kind of flow into where you are now?
I think it's solid both. In terms of me exploring my set style, a lot of the motifs and designs that I kind of incorporate have been generational. So whether it be from my father's side of the family or my mother's side of the family, it's always been present. And the fact that I have learned from them, I feel as if though me practicing and continuing to do all of those keeps them alive in not only a personal way, but in a familial way. But I definitely would label myself as a contemporary Diné weaver in the sense of I don't really weave very set designs, very, very abstract, asymmetric, a lot of energy, and I probably would just attribute it to my youth. Also, my grandfather, Roy Cady, really renowned pictorial artist. And that's kind of definitely what I would gravitate towards. I guess if you were to slap a label out on it, contemporary pictorial weaver. But those are just words.
It's so funny that you say it's your youth because I've never seen such an old soul in such a young body. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, no, and I think that kind of attests to my medium in itself,
Yeah.
something labeled as old and ancient with, a person of my age and generation. But yeah, I guess in a nutshell, my style.
I love you guys.
The stripes in our chief blankets are so bold, so not only that, but they're so, I guess you could say simple, but so elegant at the same time, that in itself is Navajo weaving, in my opinion. But for myself, I love the fact that Navajo weaving is meant to be utilitarian. It's meant to be used, it's meant to be worn. So my style of weaving, I tell people that my grandma told me, we don't only weave for ourselves, we weave for the land, we weave for the sheep so that they're prosperous and that it brings harmony, but we also weave for horses. So that was one thing that I was very, very intrigued with because I am deathly afraid of horses and horseback riding. However, I love weaving for horses. She once told me that horses are like humans. They like to look beautiful, so weave them beautiful textiles. I find great joy in weaving for horses because, as I was told by many elders, including my own, is that we attribute so much beauty to them, especially in our Beauty Way songs and ceremonies, that they also have a spirit. They also have great pride in themselves that they want to be beautiful. So weave them beautiful objects that they can be proud of. And normally with weaving a saddle blanket, it uses a very primitive type weaving called twill. And all you're doing is manipulating the warp threads to create the pattern rather than manipulating the weft to create the pattern. So that's something that I very much enjoy. And that is kind of my style.
You're such a historian of the things from the past. Like, how does that all mix together and kind of come out in your designs?
Well, like I said, what I say to a lot of these presentations, that I'm trying to give life to forgotten styles or stuff that's so archaic that people don't feel is necessarily woven today because they say that was then, no one's interested in that style, or it doesn't sell, so I don't weave that way no more. So I take that and I said I look at it because some of these older styles, like when they were weaving German towns or before the trading post, even chief blankets, the technical expertise to make a chief blanket from the 1750s is still far out of the reach of most weavers now. simply because they're not schooled enough in the older styles of making materials or looms. You take away the complexities of creation, and yet they were able to make these things that you would think a machine would make now. And then just all that knowledge, because some of this stuff back then, it was very technically expertise in their interlocks and everything. They did this with yucca. And now to look at that and then bring it back into what can you create out of that. So I've gone back, to go into color, technique, and then to give it new life and a different inspiration of what it used to be is what I hope people gather, like to take something that is a 1,200-year-old technique and make this look like modern materials, because we have things that can make that look totally different than what it is. Because even with I use acid dyes for my wool coloring, but all these colors are made with 3 colors. I just use 3 colors of acid dye and I blend them into these colors. And that technique is really old. Most Navajo churro and people who work with natural Navajo churro colors, they will take the spectrum of fleeces. There's like 12 that I know, the main colors I see, but there's a lot more, right? There's a lot more. It's a whole spectrum. But you can take like some of the blue, some of the brown, the tan with red tips, and mix it with white, and you'll get this awesome color that's like yellow in its reflection, but when you see it with no light, it's white. You can create these tricks with the color by blending, and a lot of people get gray just simply by combining black and white, and I'm taking that to that inspiration, like this old technique of blending colors, and then working with it with my yarn, so I can take what I need, spin it, and weave it, and create a picture that builds up line by line as I'm weaving it. In my head, it's going to have this bright kind of creamy color effect with no sharp lines. But that inspiration was from our ancestors, blending colors that are naturally available. Because even when cotton came around, there's 6 main colors of cotton. There's like a grayish, there's a brown, there's a creamy green, bluish, a yellow, and a white. And then with that, adding extra dyes, you can get all these different colors.
Oh gosh, you're holding so much on your plate, and when you put it in, because it's coming from so many places, it sounds like the past, the now, the nature, the animal, like it's just wonderful to hear that it's like so full, so rich. And that's what I see when I look over at the loom, is that richness.
And I think because I've had the privilege of going to collections where they have, a person brought this to us and they said it was in a crack in the rock that had been sealed over with mud, and this little cotton square was in it, and they brought it to us, but they didn't document anything. So look at it. I looked at it. I was like, oh, it gave me goosebumps. As the way it was constructed, you can go back in time and say this is like 950 AD when this was woven, and it smells like cotton that comes out of a dryer. That's how perfectly preserved this cotton was. And the edges made me cry, because it was Navajo plied in Z fashion. The warps were, if it was unwoven, the warps would just curl back into, like when you see Navajo twills in a lot of the older weavings. And I could swear you could still hear the weaving song, like it was the same song that I've heard on occasion. That's very rare now. It's like you were made in a community that loved weaving. Like there's just one of you, but I can feel everyone else. And I want my weavings to give that feeling, 500, 700 years from now, if like someone's like, we have no documentation of where this weaving came from, but its mastering technique denotes, the people who were doing this and the culture that created this loved weaving. And it wasn't just one person. I couldn't do this without my mother, without my grandmothers, without any of the men or women that they put their breath and life on the line for me to be here. The further you go back, everyone's a walking miracle.
Like, how did that evolve for you? Was this something that you were already doing when you were little? Or were you weaving then and then it evolved as you matured? Like, how did this become?
How did this become? How did
Yeah.
it happen? I wonder the same thing all the time. I'm like, how did this become this and that become this? But yeah, it was my great grandmother,
Yeah.
Angela Ashley, and I feel like I was talking the other day in what you're saying about indigenous futurisms, and I was like, and what I was saying earlier about aligning myself with my journey and my fate, and I feel like I'm both from the future and the past at the same time. I feel like there's this lineage in my life where I'm able to communicate with myself from different time frames, and so it's why I kind of am always like balanced and in tune. And when that becomes shook, or if that becomes confused, or if I have a trouble with that, weaving and moving is what brings the balance back. Yeah, I think when I've positioned myself and aligned myself with being a weaver, where my passion with it was a lot in the movement of my body left to right, the movement of my hands within the threads and within the yarns, the movement of the comb and the batten, and my passion lies in movement. It's why I'm a performer. It's why I'm a dancer. I call all my performances weaving dances. I'm one partner, the work is another partner. Sometimes we step on each other's foot. Sometimes we're like in the groove really well, and they're dances to me in that way. And I go through a cycle of weaving in my performances through actions that my body does. So if I were to be referencing this piece as like a score for a performance, I would possibly count how many wefts there are and walk back and forth that many times. So my body knows what the yarn is doing. My body can have the experience that these fibers are doing. They're so intertwined and they're so connected that I feel like I live within them and they live within me, and so we like to move and dance like each other and with each other.
And there's so much focus at this time and day in 2020 of doing things wrong, of using things wrong, that somebody isn't indigenous but wearing indigenous clothing, or maybe they're using parts of our art or elements. Like, as it applies to what we're talking about today, which is the craft, the weaving, like, how does that feel for you? Like, because we're all in it, we all have to like kind of make our own place that feels all right for us. But like, how does that feel, and how do you process that? And what would you say to somebody non-native, in these these things that happen?
Yeah. So hearing that, one of my favorite words in Navajo, one of my favorite things that I hear is when you knock on someone's door, "Washtan, come in."
Yeah.
Like, you're welcome, come in. So whether it's my mom's voice, my auntie's voices, voices of mentors and teachers, it's just like this jolt of being invited into a space and being welcomed into a space. And so with my work, I've always had that intention of, you belong here, I belong here, we belong here together, and we belong here in this space, with as much respect as we can offer to it, as it has offered us life and the ability to exist. And that leading into the conversation of how do we introduce ourselves to new cultures or new spaces in the most respectful way. And I think gift giving there is where I see that collaboration and those experiences happening. To give a gift and to receive a gift is where that beauty is. It's a beauty of carrying each other into our futures and carrying each other into our histories as well. And so I've always been someone that welcomes questions, welcomes intrigue, welcomes touch. For me, I feel like it's important for people to touch my work and for work the tactile work to have fingerprints on it, and then I consider that a collaboration. Now your story's woven in this work, so it's holding this body memory as our bodies hold memory alongside us together. And so weavings for me are weavings of stories and weavings of our stories together.
So I think what makes me cringe is they're starting to take away some of our techniques and take away the I guess the background from which it came. Like, there is what they now call chain plying or cat's cradle was very suited to Navajo weaving, and maybe, I mean, it's common throughout the world, but at least here in America it's always been in line with Navajo weaving. So now they're taking it out and saying, oh no, we're not calling it Navajo anymore, we're going to call it chain plying. So that's one thing that does make me cringe nowadays, is that rather than trying to avoid the appropriation or even giving honor to the people who originally had used those techniques, they're just kind of taking it away and bringing it into their own, you know, just leaving the persons who have always used it, just leaving them out and saying, hey, well, this is it now, and the history, the culture that developed it, at least here, is no longer attached to it. So that's kind of what's making me cringe now. I do a lot of lectures across the US. I was invited in 2019 to do a lecture in a weaving school, and I made a lot of them clutch their pearls when I said that Navajos are very great at appropriating other patterns and making it our own. Like, we wouldn't have regional patterns if it wasn't driven by the trading posts and what people in the US wanted to buy, you know. However, we've evolved it and we've made it so intricate that they could sell it for thousands of dollars. I wish that would actually be buyer and maker transactions, but it was always the middleman. So I think I always refer back to what my great-grandmother told me, is we are an adapting people. We're always changing, and we'll always make something our own.
Something that I liked, what that Eric said was, you know, he encourages people to ask questions and be involved, and I think that's probably the first step. I don't know, just general awareness and open-mindedness to whether the situation we're in or wanting to learn something new. I don't know, I'm just a general nerd, so I like to know how things work, and I'm not afraid to ask questions, and I'm a people person along with that, so most interactions that I have, I openly, you know, ask people to ask questions. Like, I work as a guide on the Grand Canyon in my free time, and, you know, part of my job is like, are you guys getting the experience that you want? I am here, I have the knowledge, I'm more than willing to share. And, you know, I, you know, definitely encourage that, because you are becoming part of the story. You're adding to the cultural density that centuries and thousands of years have collectively added for us to be here. Mm-hmm. You know, I can't be doing the work that I'm doing without, you know, those influences, as, you know, the other artists have explained. And so, I don't know, it's a simple answer, but just be a general human being. I don't know. Yeah. We have the gift of talking. You know, it's even on our creation stories, our language is a gift, so we should use it as such. You know, be able to build those bridges and communicate with each other. Ideally, I would like to be, you know, talking with just like-minded individuals, and it seems like this is a great common place for that. So, you know, if you have the interest, feel free and more than happy to ask.
We're gonna keep doing it. I want to do more of these, because this is honestly, it's fascinating to me. I've learned so much in such a short amount of time from so many different perspectives. I just really want to stay here till midnight and order pizza in, but we're gonna have to get going.
At least I've been very fortunate to get a lot of my commission pieces direct from buyer, so that's primarily what I work off of, and I definitely prefer that. With that, I do, you know, not solely, I consider myself formally said fiber artist. So with that, you know, there's so much versatility in weaving in itself, but the fiber art realm is a whole nother level above that. You know, So I can weave I can felt hats, I can weave bags, I can felt bags, you can weave belts, and the sky's the limit. And with that comes beauty, because no matter where I'm at or who I meet, there is a market for myself. And I would like to think that my charisma plays into that, because the people building is there. I mentioned that, just ask a question. That's primarily how I meet most of my buyers, is just like, oh, tell me more about your work. How can I get in contact with you? And establishing those. And that's what I'm optimistic to see. Is it seems as if though everyone's getting a little stir crazy. So I'm sure once things settle down, or should they settle down, like, people are going to be looking for new outlets and new things, and some things that have always been there. I would like to believe that I'm going to be one of those people who have yet to leave. So
I feel it's time that we empower our youth. I feel that there's no need for trading posts anymore. We don't need somebody to represent us. There's no need to sell wholesale, which was a big part of our past. I don't even feel there's a need for Indian markets. I feel that everything our kids need to learn is how to represent themselves, to be their own brand. Like, I see that in each one of you. You're so deeply authentic in who you are and what you bring to the world through your creativity. Our children need to find that confidence. Somehow, some way, you're privileged because you have that. You're so strong in who you are. I'm gonna start crying right now because I look at each of these faces and it's like so powerful what you do and what you bring, because it affects people. We see your art and it's emotional. And so for me, it's this thing of how can we use this creativity we have as a group, and how can we pass that on to our kids? How can we teach them to have that strength, to be that own authentic self? And so one of the ideas I have, one of the ideas for taking wealth and creating wealth, is what if we teach these children how to use a smartphone, how to use social media, how to use Squarespace, how to use Shopify. Then they don't have to take that craft, that piece of art, and take it to some place that buys it. It's exactly what you said with all the wool, the 3,000 pounds of wool that was sold for such a low amount of money. It's like when you take the power back and you can go directly out in the world and sell those things for yourself. I think you've all figured that out, but that's what we need to teach our kids.
There's only a small group that's getting well known and having good sales. And everyone who has a weaver in the family has gone back to the loom. So there's a lot of weavings that are going out into the market. And some of the weavers, we confide in each other that, it's too much competition. I want to weave, but, I don't want to have to do all that work and find out I need to sell it for practically nothing. So some weavers are deciding well, can I weave something I can trade with? Can I weave something that my family can use and keep them warm? And all of a sudden it was I got so happy because that's exactly what I've been doing. And, I've been able to use these weavings in the art market, but, they could so well just be everyone's blankets again. And that's what I really like. And it's really important that, that style of weaving where things are utilitarian and they have a purpose within the home and within the culture and ceremony, that doesn't that gets passed on. As soon as that doesn't get passed on, we were in that situation where no one really remembered how to weave these older blankets. So I've spent 5 years going to museums, going to grandmas that actually they didn't know that they were weaving blanket style. But that's why I feel this is important. As if you take how traders were teaching Navajo people to weave back about in the 1880s to, well, more like the 1920s and 1960s, where they wanted things perfect, everything symmetrical, corners 90 degrees. When you threw it on the floor, it had so much stiffness and tension woven into it that it would be like a piece of paper. Like you go like this, and it would naturally fall flat. You can tell those kind of weavings when people wear them as blankets, as when they wear it on their body, the blanket kind of always just looks like that. Versus if I took this one and did that, it has softness, it has drape, it conforms to your body. And that's important to know how to set that up. And it's actually just going back to the way people used to have with tools. Like I don't have any pulleys or anything to make the loom do more than what I can do with my hands. And learning how to spin my warp within that system was interesting. I've had 5 failures in trying to recreate this blanket. And 3 of them were full-size failures. And it's hard to devote, half a year, 6 months worth of getting materials and spinning, and then starting to weave and find out that you did it all wrong. So I don't, most weavers will say like, I don't want to make mistakes. I want it perfect when I do it. For me, because these things are so much unknown, they're in the museum, it was possible, but until I actually tried to do it, it wasn't until the weaving was teaching me like, you can't spin that way, you can't do it this way. So that's where I am with this one, and it's not perfect, but it's going to get finished this time. So as I always tell, like, learn the more simple version of whatever you're working on, and then supplement it with modern ideas and modern tech. So like I still can weave this, I can grow cotton, I can spin that, I can process yucca if I ever needed to, but I have no problems transferring my culture into a 4-shaft loom where I'm going.
Well, I started the ranch when I was 13 years old, and I'm going to be turning 31 soon. And I decided at a young age that I wanted to raise sheep. So when I turned 13, I was like, you know what, this is it, I'm going for it. And I started out with, I'd say about 5 sheep, and we've grown to about 80. And now we keep lower numbers because of the extreme drought that we're going through. But what we do is, obviously we raise sheep. I harvest the wool and process the wool into yarn and use it in my weavings. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to show because I work by commission, so anything that comes right off the loom is shipped off ASAP. The breed that we raise here on the ranch, they're called Navajo churro sheep, but we Navajo have many names for them. One of them being Diné Be Iiná, which refers to their long, coarse wool. But a lot of other elders call them Diné Be, which means the first sheep, the original sheep. And the breed, the Navajo churro breed, they are the first sheep that were brought here to the U.S. by Spanish expansion. And they were acquired by our people way back in the 1600s, I believe. And the Navajo became a very prolific shepherd as well as a horseman. And the sheep are now vital to our people and to our culture. As long as I've been a part of the sheep culture, I've also been a part of the organization called Diné Be Iiná. And in English, that translates to the Navajo Lifeway. And what we do there is we promote and we are trying to preserve the Navajo pastoral lifeway, which is raising the sheep and the goats, as well as promoting and preserving the weaving culture within the Navajo society. We are also big advocates for the youth to get involved, and we're trying new outlets to keep their interests in becoming self-sustained artists. My grandma is one of the few twill weavers that I know, and a lot of what it's associated with are saddle blankets. And twill weaving in the Navajo weaving culture is actually starting to dwindle. There are people who either don't want to teach it or who have no interest in learning it, because if you're putting a trader value on those weavings, they'll only fetch about 150 at a trading post. As a person, I'm very sensitive to a lot of things, and smells being one of them. So when I first started to dye, the fumes were just so noxious that I could not do anything. Like I would just get a headache and I was down and sick. So I thought to myself, why would I dye for these colors when I could breed for them? So I shifted from a primarily white flock to a color flock. That way I could use the colored wool that was harvested from a sheep. So a friend and I, she raised a sheep as well. Her name is Diné. And funny story, we met like in 2013, and our ranch here is called Coyote Spring Farm. And apparently, I don't remember because I was working in an office and things were so busy back then, but she called me and she was very nervous because I had been an established breeder and she was just starting out. And eventually over time we became really good friends, to where she's of course an ally for our people, and she has become so much of like my sister. And come to find out that her farm is called Spring Coyote Ranch. So it was kind of funny that kind of lined up. But her and I decided this year, with the whole novel coronavirus starting up and creating this pandemic that we're in, that we've realized that a lot of flocks of Navajo churro were being overlooked in terms of wool and wool production. And one of our goals, or one of our hopes, is to somehow find an outlet so that wool is used. So with the Rainbow Fiber Co-op, we've decided that we want to identify 3 large flocks of Navajo churro sheep on the reservation, and offer them a fair price to purchase their clip from them. And when we do that, we plan on sending it out to be processed into roving and into yarn. And from there, we plan to market it at prices that will, in a way, sustain a buy for next year. And hopefully we keep that going to where we can keep purchasing, and maybe even adding more flocks to purchase from in the future.
I think it's just really important, not only our role as organisms, but as a species in the natural world. And my relationship has always been pretty intimate, I'd like to consider. I'm a pretty large just environmental advocate on a lot of different realms. And with that, as I've mentioned, just my relationship is very, very, very sacred, kind of, so to speak. And I say this just being that the lumen in itself represents the natural world, and the relationship between Mother Earth and Father Sky. And the more I was more in tune and found familiarity in who I was as a person, the more I realized that those natural cycles are not only like quintessential, but I'm a part of, and that's something that I've been very fortunate to experience. And so the natural world in general is, as you're hearing me explain, is just an overall constant in this whole process of sheep to loom. We raise the sheep and we bring them up to our summer camp, and part of that, is being out in the elements and experiencing life on a seasonal and just everyday level. And for me to sit at the loom and work and completely disregard that seems very foreign to me. So, I call the trail my studio, being that I just draw so much inspiration, and it's not new in most art forms, and specifically this medium. It's just they go hand in hand, and in my mind, to disaffiliate them is to just look at one side of the same coin. I'm gonna weave while I do this, if that's cool.
That's cool.
I think when you're trying to find out the vernacular to accurately portray and embody what this whole process encapsulates. So this is really just a long-winded way of saying I don't really like to use the word traditional and contemporary. In the art realm, yeah, I will use the phrase contemporary Diné fiber artist, being that it's very specific to what I'm doing. And in terms of like an art realm, it seems as if though that's a little more understandable and universally kind of taken in, and I use that in that way. But in terms of labeling tradition on something like this, like the colors I'm using are not new. People have been, our people have been inventive with colors for as long as we can remember, and I mean, I mentioned that everything in the natural world is, our medium, and so it's really cool to, be a part of all of it. And then not only that, but, I look at the differences. I mean, this dude in general, like his tail, that's a gorgeous blonde, a nice dirty blonde. I don't know, in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, onion skins, chat, any, or dock root, derivatives of that. It's an ongoing process. So, using the word traditional distances people from the past from people currently. And so, I mentioned that these techniques and processes are not new. And so as such, part of the living culture aspect of this has all been here. I'm just another guy weaving.
I kind of just become like this guider of materials in a lot of ways. I've never considered what I do as a weaver as a hierarchy of myself and material. I've always considered it a collaborative process, and I feel like as artists and makers, we are students to our material. Our material holds the knowledge. And while I also think that art and education go hand in hand, I feel like as artists, we share knowledge of the material, and the material is our teacher. The material is the guider and the mentor. And so giving respect to particularly fibers in my case, and what they want to do and what they want to say. As fiber artists, we have a very forgiving media, and as weavers, we have a very forgiving media, because as we build, it's like millimeter by millimeter. It's a very meticulous process, but it's a process that I love so much. And sometimes even the connotations of that word meticulous or time consuming, I feel like is disrespectful. I feel like it's more of like a long movie or like a long story that we share with each other. And so giving respect to the fact that these materials take time to work with, because they want to live in your hands, they want to be in your hands. And our hands want to do the same thing. And so I feel like I was born with that ideology, coming from a family of weavers on both sides of my family. Now, thinking back on it, I think that I've always considered art and wearable art as armor, and clothes and fibers as shields. Because when you think about the innate intention or the innate qualities of rugs or of weavings is for warmth, for comfort, for protection, and it lives with that, and it's supposed to live on our bodies, and it's supposed to live with us. And so I made the active decision as an artist that every weaving that I do has to be worn or accessed by my body in some way, whether that's through a shawl or through wearing it on my head, through an object that I carry, because they carry me, they carry my belief system, and they carry my cosmologies and philosophies, particularly of hajol, of goodness and balance and harmony. And so all of those things woven together kind of make up this a landscape of the threads that create this tapestry of my existence. And so I welcome them, I let them in, they let me in, we hang out, we dance, we have a good time. Future of textile. I've made this joke with friends before that I'm from the future. And so sometimes they'll ask me something like, how do you know that? I'm like, oh, I'm from the future. And so it's become like this running joke, particularly with my coworkers. They'll ask me something and they're like, oh, he's from the future, he'll figure it out. But in a lot of ways, I feel like I've been so connected with a certain level of destiny that I have, and a certain level of aligning myself with my dreams and my passions, that as I present myself to them, they present themselves back. And so in terms of making, I've always welcomed failure, and I've always welcomed mistakes, and I've always welcomed bad art, and silly art. I feel like there's a big layer of humor in my work that people maybe don't immediately touch up upon, which is fine because it's hidden. I think as people learn about me, they do see that I'm a jokester in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of humor in my work. I mean, there's a beanie baby on one of my regalia pieces for for all intents and purposes of that statement. But I feel like in terms of the future of contemporary weaving, I've always considered a warp and a weft as a weaving. And so if there's one object that lays here, and if there's one object that lays here, and if they're connected in that way, it becomes a weaving. I consider storytelling weaving in that way, because as my story crosses with your story, we are now woven together within our own lives and now our journeys. And so I think of the future as weaving as all objects in a lot of ways, as all things that can be knotted, as all things that can be touched. And so in my practice, doing a weaving on a traditional Diné loom, but then having that weaving then live as a thing that can be embroidered upon, and a thing that now becomes an object, and a thing that now becomes worn, and a thing that now becomes torn, and a thing that now becomes mended back together, and a thing that now becomes splattered with paint, and then now that object living on the ground and rolled in the dirt, and then now buried with my body. I feel like that life of a weaving doesn't end when it becomes off the loom. I feel like it continues, just as we do. I feel like the loom is the cradle board of our life, and as we were let out of our own cradle boards, it didn't mean that our life ended. It doesn't mean that the life of the weaving ended. It means it was just now has the structure to stand up straight and have better posture. And so we scar, we tear, we hurt, we break, we love, we gift, we radiate, we celebrate. And so I consider all aspect of the life of a weaving to exist even beyond when it lives on the ground. Because now maybe it's on the ground, and then now it becomes the fibers of a tree. And so I can see that whole journey together, and that whole cycle together. It's life and death and rebirth and re-death and rebirth again and re-death again. It's all connected to me.